As a Christian, what we believe is that Jesus is the image of full humanity and full divinity put together, which logically is an impossibility. You're either one or the other. So we have non-duality at the core, at the center of the whole mystery. And then he says himself, I and the Father are one. So we have the human Jesus totally identifying with the divine God. We have Jesus being material and yet clearly a highly spiritually evolved person. So you would have thought that Christianity would have been, masterful at understanding non-duality, because our basic doctrines can't be understood without it. And yet, what happened, of course, it got filtered through Greek thinking, and I'm not saying Greek thinking isn't wonderful, it is. But it tends, for the sake of clarity, to be rather dualistic. It differentiates, it clarifies. And so that filter originally through the Greek mind, and then overtaken largely by the West, not entirely, but largely, we just didn't develop. We didn't develop the non-dual understanding, and we didn't teach it to people. So they had a doctrine that Jesus is fully human and fully divine, but they didn't have the mind to really know how to understand that. So you can see why we emphasize belief. Well, believe it, not really experience it, you see. They didn't know how to experience it, for the most part, except at the mystical level. And of course, we've always had the Christian mystics who got it. But we never used the word non-dual. We needed the East to give us the word. And once you have the word, then the clarification follows afterwards, it seems to me. Certainly not on the broad level. On the cultural level, Christianity is almost invested in dualistic thinking. And we call it fundamentalism. This very simplistic, black and white, we have the truth way of thinking, which I'm sad to say is almost the public image of most Christianity. It's only when you go to the mystical level again, and there's always a few in every group who get it. But in many ways they were marginalized. Maybe they weren't taken seriously. In the Catholic Church, where I'm from, we would canonize them saints, but after they're dead. Do you understand? When they're no threat anymore, when they're no, when we can make them pious and beautiful and not a threat to our present way of thinking. So I'm sorry to say it's a subtext. I've been happy. I wrote a book on the subject for Christians, and at this point, it's been out 3 years. I'm very grateful how well it's been received. In fact, I can't say I've received a single substantial disagreement in letter form or written form. So it's almost like I think we're ready for it. My God, this makes sense. My God, this is true. And this has been very gratifying for me. I think it's one reason I was probably invited here as a Christian, because a lot of the world religions just gave up on Christianity. They saw that our history has been so violent. And I think when you're dualistic, you're always going to be violent. The two go together. And so I hope I can give a little turning of the corner to that history. I originally was going to entitle the book The Third Eye, which is a Christian term from the 10th, 11th century. But most Christians think it refers to Hindu or Buddhist thinking. They don't know it's in their own vocabulary. But because they said everybody's going to think Richard became a Hindu, What could be worse than that? So they said, let's give it a different title. And a phrase I used in the book was the naked now. That it's all about, as all of our teachers say, about learning how to live right here, right now. So that's the title they gave it. And the subtitle is Learning to See as the Mystics See. And I think that, of course, appealed very much to Christians. The mystics are in right now because we realize this is a mentality that we all have neglected, have not understood, and now very much need. So it's sort of got a magic to it, the word the mystics. And I think maybe that's what led a lot of people to trust the book. And, well, you asked me what the message is. The message is that I believe non-dual thinking is at the heart of Christianity. We just never use that word. The word that is found more in the Christian tradition is unitive consciousness. So the three stages of the spiritual journey, going back to 8th century, I believe, is the purgative way was the first third of the journey, the illuminative way was the middle journey, and the unitive way was the last stage of the journey. But no one really described for us what that unitive way was like. We just knew these people were all very loving, they could forgive their enemies, they could overlook offenses, they looked beyond racial divisions. I'm a Franciscan. My own father, St. Francis, who was Italian, of course, he makes 3 trips to the Islamic world, all in the 13th century when no one was doing that, trying to build bridges with Islam. And we now have this fully historically recorded. This isn't legend or something. Because at the mystical level, the Muslims are not our enemies. You understand? You see at a higher level. So that's, of course, why we desperately need this now. If you go to the Smithsonian Library in Washington, D.C., I'm told by an academic there that the longest single bibliography of any human being ever on this planet is Francis of Assisi. That he's written about from every religious angle. The other religions admire him, the non-Catholics admire him, because we didn't use the word again, but because he was so non-dual. Probably the aspect you most, if you know anything about him, what he's most known for, he's called the patron saint of ecology, because he talked to the animals, all right? He befriended the animal world. He called them brother and sister. He called the natural elements brother sun, sister moon, brother fire, sister air. So that aspect is probably the most Franciscan, that he didn't experience a split between himself and the natural world. So, when we came over to the New World, we called that animism or native religion or pagan religion. Now we recognize it was actually Christian religion too, but it was non-dual Christian religion. So once you call animals and elements brother and sister, you're giving them subjectivity. You understand? It's subject to subject. It isn't subject-object, that I know them separate from me, but I give them the capacity for mutuality, for reciprocity, for what Martin Buber called, the I-thou relationship. So I think we're very excited as Franciscans to recognize that we're in a prime position to teach non-duality. And then you add it to the political level, as I just mentioned, his trips to Islam. Protestantism didn't exist at that point. Everybody in Italy was Catholic. So he didn't have to move to non-Christian groups. They were all the same group. But he moved it even farther by going beyond the Christian world which in his time was very risky, I think, and very demanding, probably. You know, the eternal now, until you said it, I mean, this shows my ethnocentricity. I would have assumed that was a Christian phrase, you know, because that's where I heard it from, of course. The eternal now, gee, I know Paul Tillich talks about it. He writes a whole book on that. He's a European Christian theologian, and he charts the history in Christianity. But it was never, you know, mainline, I'm sad to say. It was always something monks and nuns would read about, perhaps. The one phrase that did become rather well known from a 17th century Jesuit was the sacrament of the present moment. It's a beautiful phrase that many of us grew up with, the sacrament of the present moment, that everything was right here, right now, in this moment, to experience God. So again, we had it, but we have to retrieve it for the masses, because I'm afraid the masses never got it, by and large. They got belief systems and belonging systems instead of transformational systems that really changed your wiring up here. Now and then it would happen. Usually people who went on a serious prayer journey, like you'll see in the Philokalia and Eastern Orthodoxy, you know, the monk who just walks and keeps repeating the Jesus prayer all over Russia. So you'll see it. It's always found, but it's always on the edge. Very sad to say. And never became the message that was taught in the normal Sunday parish church, in Orthodoxy or in Catholicism or in Protestantism. All three of us marginalized the transformational message. Although I would say Eastern Orthodoxy has it most in its written documents. Do you understand? It's there, especially in the first 5 centuries. It's all there. But once we became a part of the empire, for us the Roman Empire, in the East the Byzantine Empire, once you're into imperial religion, you don't really want transformation of people. You want loyalty, you want obedience, you want conformity, you want to create the Roman Empire. You want everybody to think the same. The last thing you want is transformation of consciousness, because they won't be loyal citizens of Byzantium or Rome. So we all lost by our identification with power and empire, at least in my opinion. Now in that, I reflect a lot of St. Francis. You know, I don't know, again, how much you know about his life, but he just pretty much walked outside the system. And his life was an assault on the whole beginnings of the capitalistic system of the West. He refused to participate in it. Francis, he's been called the first Protestant, and that's meant as a compliment. You understand? That he protested in a very good way. But you're right. He's a model for really nonviolent resistance. And here's the phrase that sums it up. We say the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. Just go ahead and do it better. Don't fight people, don't criticize people, don't, you know, just go ahead and do it better. And that would be the heart of Franciscan philosophy. It's not hard prophecy, it's soft prophecy. Just kindly try to do it better yourself. Instead of making demands on other people, make the demand on yourself. So yeah, we never have to apologize for St. Francis. You know, he got so much so right. He's been called the first Protestant because he protested. He's also been called the last Christian. I'm sure there have been many Christians. I know there have been many Christians. But the point is that he really got the whole thing seriously. Not in an intellectual way. He was not an intellectual. Just an intuitive. Yeah. He did it by reason of lifestyle. And that's the best way, I think. The word that, although the word to be enlightened is in the New Testament, particularly John's Gospel, the word that took over in the West, and I think in Eastern Christianity too, was salvation. And, I mean, that's workable if you understand it right. But here's the problem. We pushed off salvation to the next world. It became a reward-punishment system of heaven and hell for later. That pretty much destroyed its transformative power. It largely was just, I cynically call it fire insurance, you know, where you're just paying your fire insurance dues so you don't go to hell. So this is not transformative religion anymore. Islam very often has made the same mistake. It seems all religion at the less mature levels make religion into a reward-punishment system, which is dualistic, of course, because that's the dualistic mind. And it's pushed off till after death. But the word salvation, if you go back to the Scriptures and really see when Jesus uses the word, he will say, your faith has saved you. He's talking about present tense, you know. Right now, you have experienced salvation. Go in peace, you got it, you know. It's so clear in healing after healing story that Jesus is talking about the present. And that we didn't get that. We made the healing stories into miracles to prove that Jesus can do miracles. And if you believe that Jesus can do miracles, then that proves he's God. That's not the point of the healing stories at all, to prove he's God. They're to prove that transformation can happen, that people can change, that people can grow up. And we didn't look at them that way. It was all just, hooray, we're right, Jesus can work miracles, and therefore that proves that Jesus is God, which doesn't really follow, as you know. But that's been the style in Eastern Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism, all three of us. You know, we reflected the extroverted West. We're an extroverted culture, and that's not all bad. I'm an extrovert myself, but when you externalize everything and you make it all form instead of emptiness, as the non-dual teachers would say, you miss the core of the message. It all becomes about belonging to the right group. And then your group, that's your badge, that's your identity. And you know the history of Europe. I mean, it's just been non-stop killing of one another. When you didn't belong to the right group, you'd think we would have got it. You really do, but we didn't. And yet when I teach in Europe, it's amazing how many people are getting it now. I told you earlier I'm going to Romania in June, and there are the prison chaplains from all of Europe. Christian prison. Well, no, I think some Jewish are coming too. And they want to be taught about this because they realize the bad effects in the prisons of Europe. Why most of these people made these terrible mistakes that ruined their lives and ruined the lives of others is almost always they were dualistic thinkers. And they had no way to process the anger, the abuse, and they usually are abused people. But they had no way to deal with that abuse. So they struck back at society, and that got them in jail, which isn't helping anybody. You know, they don't become enlightened, and the world doesn't become enlightened either. It's heartbreaking. It's taken me a long time to get here. To even formulate it. But I do realize I'm a manifestation of something that is happening everywhere all the time. And I can't take credit for that. All I can do is thank somebody else for letting me be a manifestation. A momentary, apparently. I mean, I believe in eternal life as a Christian, but I wasn't aware of myself before the last 68 years, which is what I am now. So I'm a manifestation that has become aware of itself slowly over 68 years, that I am this manifestation. And again, all that allows me to do is be grateful. That's the only, for me, and maybe, no, not just grateful, even somewhat confident. Because if I am the same as all the rest, then I don't need to apologize for myself or hate myself. Or I know I'm not perfect, but I know I share in the common domain. Okay.